Hey Nerdpreneurs! In today's episode, we invited Devon from our interview about Startplaying.games back on to talk about tabletop RPGs. We pick his brain on the best systems for various styles of play, and there are dozens of systems referenced in this episode. For a complete list of every system we talk about, check the show notes for what we are calling Nerdpreneur's Ultimate List of Tabletop RPGs. Frank whipped this up over the weekend, and it's awesome, it's free, and you can find links to more information on each and every game. Now enjoy the episode.
Talking nerdy. We're just talking nerdy. With all this talking nerdy. Oh, come on, you wanna talk nerdy.
Welcome, Devon. Welcome back. How are you?
Thanks for having me again, gents.
Always a pleasure.
Always.
I don't know exactly how we want to start this, but I want to maybe you could tell a little bit about, maybe why not 5th edition? Like, can we start there? Because when you Google like where to play tabletop RPGs, it's just littered with 5th edition stuff, and tabletop RPGs seems to be synonymous with Dungeons and Dragons. So I'd be curious, just why should people even consider checking out systems that aren't Dungeons and Dragons?
So I think, I heard someone put this really, really well. Her name's Janine Dillard, old player of mine, big in the tabletop space. And she was talking about how she approaches GMing. And she starts with the story, and she finds the system for the story. And I think that's a really great way to go about it. And I started, more thinking about the approach, and I just never heard the words put it in that way, and it just makes so much sense. So shout out to Janine for that one. But think about the story you want to tell, and sometimes that is a 5e, but sometimes there's a better system to tell that type of story. Like, do you want to do crime? Do you want to do heists? Then obviously Blades in the Dark is going to be one of the best systems for that. Do you want to play a modern game? There's plenty of amazing kind of modern systems, like Monster of the Week for, cryptids and ghosts and the paranormal. If you want to play a superhero game, you're probably going to play Masks or any other game out there rather than try to adapt 5th edition. And there's something about like gaming in general where like we're always trying to hack things into a system to better tell our stories. And I won't knock people for, trying to do that, but I feel it puts a lot of work on the player and the GM when you hack it too far. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm a better GM because I've played more tabletop RPGs. I don't know if that makes you a better GM. To me, though, I know I'm a better GM because of that.
Yeah, I totally get that. I mean, the first non-D&D one I picked up was Star Trek Adventures. And as soon as I learned it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is making me so much more understanding of the nuance in Dungeons and Dragons, why D&D is great for new players, but also why it isn't.
There's a lot of rules in every one of these systems a lot of times. And I'm curious, like, I think that's a barrier for a lot of people just getting into the game in general is like, do I have to read this whole book or whatever it is, no matter what tabletop RPG? And I think a lot of people wind up starting in D&D or trying out D&D because it's like an entry level. It's so popular, right? Everyone thinks that is the place to start. But I'm curious if you have a better game in which to start people on in order to get them interested in tabletop RPGs to begin with. Maybe something little rules light, or what are some other things we could consider in that decision?
Yeah, so I really think it depends on the person, their interest. I mean, like there's a like kind of an Agatha Christie meets Golden Girls game called Brindlewood Bay, that you are like solving like mysteries that have like kind of sometimes a paranormal like spark to it, and that's a great if people aren't interested in fantasy, but maybe they're interested in like a little bit of paranormal kind of ghost kind of thing, or
Almost like X-Files with Golden Girls type vibes.
Yeah, right. But I don't think Brindlewood Bay has to exclusively be paranormal, but like it has that kind of like mystery vibe where you're all working together as a team to kind of uncover something. Then you have like really intense but beautiful games like Alice is Missing that are deal with some like very real issues, and it's played in such a way that it's very kind of it's on a track in the sense that like you are playing a character rather than like making characters. So it really depends on like what do you love, what gets you excited, because if you're not a big fan of high fantasy, there's going to be something else out there for you. And I think great game masters and being able to find those communities is like the best way to get involved. I think it's always easier to learn a game by playing than trying to like consume the rules and then come to the table. So having a group that's willing to learn together, or having someone that can teach you, I think is like one of the best ways to get into the game.
Yeah, or to try paying a pro GM in that place to actually do it. Goes little shout out for your Startplaying.games, but
I
that
mean,
sounds like
I
a
book
great
a
place
lot
if
of
you want to
GMs.
try a system, right?
I book a lot of GMs when I want to learn a new system,
Yeah.
and they're always like, "Wait, are you that Devon?"
Exactly. I'm like, I want to learn how to play Dune. I'm reading the book, but I could also just like pay someone to play with, and then you do learn a lot faster by doing it, right? It's like being in Mexico to learn Spanish, right? And actually doing it versus like I studied it in college in Delaware. It's like
Yeah,
it's not quite the same way of learning.
one is way more memorable.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
You said something that made me realize we should probably back up. You talked about the type of player, and I think that's a really important thing to address before we dive into all the different kinds of systems and what would be best. I wanted to share what I have learned briefly about when I've taught new players. There's usually two categories, and I'm sure you'll have more to add, which I'd love to hear. The first is the type of player that really just loves to say what they do and kind of tell and contribute to the story and not be too worried about like what are the rules, what do I do? And then on the flip side, there's the other extreme on the spectrum, which is okay, what can I do based on what the rules allow me to do? So
Yeah,
they want to work very much in the world of the rules and the system so that that can inform what they're allowed to do. What
Mhm.
do you
yeah.
find are the groups within that?
I think you really hit it on the head. I think there's always this moment when new people come to the game and they're like, "Wait, so like, what are my options?" And it's like, well, technically, there's mechanics that will fit into whatever you want to do without having to like look at your options. And that's like honestly how I've taught most people to play any game. I'm like, what would you want to do in this scenario? They're like, well, I mean, like, I have magic. I would love to like stop them with some magic. Like, cool. All right, let's see. What kind of magic do you have? Like, oh, okay. And then other things like, I'd like to convince them not to. I'm like, okay, cool. You want to like use you want to use your charm, or you want to use your consort ability. And so I always like leading with decisions to mechanics rather than mechanics to decisions. Um, but I think I think people who've played games more often do like look at it mechanic first, and then like how can this fit in? And I think if we can always back up and always kind of look at it from like, hey, what I really want to do is this, and then like how can we get to that? And I think as a GM, I always like when I hear players say like, this is what I want to, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm like, oh, great, rather than like I want to charm them. Where I'm like, I want to convince this person to be an ally of mine so I can like get a look behind their files. I'm like, oh, I love that. Great. And I think that leads to better gameplay because everyone is kind of clear on the goals and like what people are wanting to accomplish and like where the stakes then lie.
And you can, as the GM, also have a little bit more, especially playing with newer players, an
Yeah.
ability to say, well, oh, you can use this mechanic because as the GM, you'll know the mechanics to say, oh, you could use your charm spell to do that thing you're trying to do, or you can try and attempt it with your skills or something.
Yeah.
That's smart. And it keeps people also in the game of like what actually matters here versus resource management, which is often what happens when you have like an abundance of abilities and you're trying to like do a dungeon crawl or something like that. It's a different style of play.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
I guess I want to start with the kind of game maybe that I'm looking for. So maybe I'll start with that and ask selfishly in the direction. But if I were wanting to play something that was kind of rules light, but was very and fairly immersive, but had elements of horror with it, right? That was kind of like a horror game,
Yeah.
or maybe, but maybe could be sci-fi too, like sci-fi horror, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, I've always been intrigued by that kind of genre, and if I wanted to akin it to something like System Shock 2, I don't know if you ever played that game or not, but
No.
there's some go check that game out. It's
Okay.
old now, but it was such a great atmosphere. You're just on like this ship that's in the middle of like the galaxy, and you wake up and you don't know who you are or what's going on,
Ooh.
but you're
Okay.
like slowly discovering what happened to the ship, which is like there's no one alive, but something
Yeah.
clearly went wrong. Anyway, it's kind of that style.
So here are three games I would recommend. Mothership and Death in Space, which are both what I like to call fight to lose games,
Hmm.
where the chance of survival is little and dying is part of the game almost. And they have, like kind of panic systems that like when terrifying things continue to happen, you start to kind of lose your grip on reality, and it starts to kind of like, cause like distress in your character and in how to deal with that. Those are great like sci-fi horror games that are pretty rules light. Death in Space was a game like I read in an afternoon. And when I say that, like in an hour, and I was able to like get everyone on the table, rolled up characters together. We were playing in less than 30 minutes.
That's awesome.
Oh wow.
Yes, same with Mothership. Those are two fantastic games. Really rules light, really really fun. They kind of really land on the idea of a lot of kind of like table roles for kind of random outcomes. But one of my favorite horror games ever is Dread.
Dread.
And Dread is a game where you don't have dice. Instead, you have a Jenga tower or a wooden block tower.
Ooh.
Because it's a trademark on Jenga. But everything that is every action you want to take that is considered a risky decision or a risky action, you'll have to take X amount of blocks from the tower and stack them on top. So if you're like I'm outrunning the killer, I'd like to maybe push a bunch of stuff down the staircase to block his path. I'm like, okay, grab 2 blocks. You're like, all right. But if you're like, all right, I want to try to start the chainsaw and get and cut the killer. Okay, cool. Grab 4 blocks. And if the tower falls over while you're pulling, your character is then doomed, which means something bad might happen to them. It's kind of like you're out of the game. Sometimes your character could, unalive themselves right then and there. Sometimes it might happen later, but essentially their character's doomed and kind of out of the game. And when you rebuild the tower, you take out more blocks so that it's even more precarious the longer you go. It's a great system. It creates so much tension because there is a physical thing that you're interacting with that is showing like the likelihood of surviving.
That sounds like so much fun. That would be like such a great way to get people into the game, because Jenga is something people are very, very familiar with too, right? So do you have to set it up over and over again too? Like if it falls,
Yeah.
you keep going. Okay, cool.
And does each person have their own tower?
No, there's one tower for everyone. So someone could do something risky, succeed, and then that you might want to do something that isn't as risky but still requires a pull of a block, and that kind of so everyone is kind of building on that tower together.
Does the DM ever have to take stuff, or the GM?
No, the GM just sets like what the difficulty is. You just decide, is it 1 block? Is it multiple blocks? It's incredibly thrilling. Like I've never seen a table that didn't just like lose their bananas while playing this game.
That's awesome.
I would like to ask a good game or system for story building or world building as a group at the table, so it's not entirely run by the GM.
Blades in the Dark is pretty good for some of that, because there's a lot of impact the players have. Ars Magica is also a really cool system that you could explore to like have impact on like what the world looks like. Ars Magica, you play as 3 people. You play as a wizard. You play as like a peasant or someone kind of like low level, and then you kind of play as like the right hand of the wizard, and you essentially play in 3 different scopes. So the wizard, you're kind of like making worldwide or kingdom-wide decisions that affect a lot of people. You are like one of the most powerful wizards in the world. And the retainer is kind of making like these, like not low level, but kind of like medium high level, kind of like knight level decisions. And then you have a peasant that can just like create an incident that is felt all across the world because they made a tiny little mistake that grew into something else. I forget what they're called in Ars Magica, what the lowest level is. It's like kind of like grunts or something like that. Really, really funny. Or like oafs. But that's a great game. And then if you want to play something like, did you say Street Magic? Is that the name of it? I'm sorry. Did you say Street Magic? Which is a great city building game. It's like GM-less, so it's just like people around the table building a city together. The Quiet Year is also fantastic. It's kind of like a doomed society and like why they're doomed, and it's played with cards, and everyone around the table kind of influences the outcome. It's a really good way to like build a world before playing. And then Microscope is also fantastic. Microscope is if you kind of want to build a timeline of events before you play with your group. That's also a lot of fun. And then Companion's Tale, or Eulogy or Effigy, I think. But Companion's Tale is where you are. Everyone is telling stories about a hero, and so like you could have been their lover, and then someone else could have been their mother, and someone else could have been like their best friend, and you're all telling stories about that person. That's a great way to make cool NPCs.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's kind of stems from a place of, I mean, I have a couple friends that really love to tell stories and build them together, but D&D, that we all seem to know, it takes a long time, and you
Yeah.
only tend to control your one character. One of the things I loved so much about playing Monster of the Week is that character relationship system where, when you build your characters and you come together, everyone establishes their relationship with each other player. And to me, that kind of blew my mind. So of course I had to homebrew a system for D&D. Depending on your class, you had 4 options and like go from there. But finding something that goes beyond that. And you actually even answered my next question, which was, what is a good city builder game? Kind of like, I have been homebrewing a system that incorporates resource management that the players do as they slowly establish and build onto a city that's on the ruins of something that used to be. And of course, I haven't gotten to test it yet because the people who want to play D&D often aren't the people who want to build a city. They're like, no, I want to go adventuring. And I have to say, no, there is adventuring as well. But like, there's also the city part I need to test. And they're like, nah, I want to build this. I want to adventure. So
that's a like a very common thing I hear. And one of the things I do, especially to get players to play new games, like outside of like if I have players that just play D&D and I want them to try a new game, and this has worked really, really well.
You bribe them with beer.
Right. We play other games set in their same narrative. So I had done this once where the group, we had some people that are out, and I didn't want to continue the story, so we played like a Blades in the Dark game as part of the adventure, and they played as the Thieves Guild that they've commonly come up against, and they kind of love this Thieves Guild. Like, gosh, so cool, they're so badass, and they got to play as those characters in a Blades in the Dark game, and they didn't really know how the story fit in until the end, and like, wait, oh my gosh, like we stole the jewel from so and so, like, oh, and because it was part of the narrative, part of something they already cared about, it was really easy to get them to do the buy-in to try that game out.
Did you have any conflict when it came to joining the 2 systems in the same world?
No, I mean, I think that just comes with like, after a while as being a DM, like I kind of know like where I want to change things, and being really clear with players, like, hey, we don't have ghost in this. We're gonna replace ghost with magic. So anytime you see ghost, replace with magic. You're a sorcerer instead of a ghost whisperer. Or I forget. I think it's a weird. I forget what the term in Blaze in the Dark is. The book's right here, but whatever. But yeah. So, but in Blaze in the Dark, you can control ghosts and you can convince them to do things, and you leverage ghost power. And instead, I just like that. That's gonna be magic.
Right.
And it pivoted really easily.
Okay, so it came down to ultimately being clear with your players that, hey, like, in order for us to make this work within our world, we're going to change some of the terminology. I see.
Yeah.
That's great.
And it works the same. It's just, the flavor's different.
We've mentioned this before, that there's a bunch of games that have different sort of atmospheres, and they create a different vibe, I guess. And to me, it's like, if I were bringing over a bunch of people to my place to play a new game, I'd be thinking about the vibe I wanted to create. So if it was a Halloween party, maybe it's more of a horror genre game. But like, if I just wanted to have people over and it was going to be like a laughy, funny, conducive to comedy, everyone just jokes about, like, what kind of system would be really great for that kind of thing?
Fiasco. Absolutely.
Cool.
Fiasco, it's also kind of GM-less.
Oh.
It can be played in a few hours, no preparation. But it's kind of like a, who wrote Fargo? What were it's like a Coen Brothers film.
Brothers. Yeah.
And it just gives you rules on like how to kind of create a story together, and everyone kind of adds to that. And you can kind of see the dramatic irony kind of building. And you lean into that. and it's a lot of fun. And the whole idea, the whole time, you're just trying to engineer very ludicrous things to happen. But that's definitely like such an easy game to get people together just to start playing.
Nice. What about something that's completely the opposite? And say I wanted to have like a long running campaign with an incredibly rich world to be able to dig in with and have lots of really unique and different discoveries, like more exploration sort of based. And, the world building is crazy that way.
Probably something like Forbidden Lands. That's by Free League, I believe. Forbidden Lands is kind of like a hex crawl. They do travel really well. They do exploration really well. Everything's kind of dangerous outside of settlements, and kind of creates for really good like long term, but discover the world together. That's a lot of fun. I think anyone who likes fantasy and also enjoys the idea of exploration and kind of like long stories would love Forbidden Lands.
I haven't heard of that one. Do you play as classes in that one?
Yeah, I forget what the classes are, but it's I think it uses the Year Zero system, which is like fantastic. So what classes do they have? Your kin, your profession. I think it's profession that you choose.
Yeah, I guess that's another question to consider because as far as the dice system, we talked about alternative methods, which was like the block tower, but one of the things that isn't quite obvious to a lot of people who've just played D&D and wasn't obvious to me is that D&D uses the system of a D20 and several other dices. Star Trek Adventures uses 2D20 and a couple D6s, but the D6 sides are something different. And then some systems just use D6s. It doesn't matter too much, but what do you find? It doesn't matter too much on what people go with, but what do you find is a good system for people? Is the D20 the best way for people to like learn? Or does it come down to like, smaller numbers is actually easier, or is that just not really that important?
So I really like Forge in the Dark and Powered by the Apocalypse system because it just uses the D6, and so like people don't have to like think about other shapes of dice.
And everyone's got them too, right? Like it's like, I
Right.
got a Yahtzee over here. We can just break that out and play this game.
Yeah, because here's the thing: is like if people don't like a modern like let's go and kill monsters, or they don't like any of the settings or kind of like the stories that are like tied to those systems, then they probably won't be as invested and willing to learn. So if someone's like, I want high fantasy, and I want like D&D, then yeah, like it's gonna be D20, it's gonna be the entire those 7 dice. But if someone's like, oh, I really like this, and the dice isn't really an aspect of it, it really comes down to like the stories they want to tell and the adventures they want to have. But I have noticed that like I think it's easier to teach games that only use like a single type of die. I have these learn to play dice that are different colors, so the D4 is yellow, the D6 is red, the D8 is green, the D10
that's great.
and the D20 is white. And so when I'm teaching new people, I'm like, go ahead and grab the purple die and roll that. That's a D10. Like, oh, cool. All right. And they grab it because I always see how flustered people get when I say, go ahead and roll a D12. And they're like, and they don't know which one it is. And they grab the D8 and they're like, is it? Nope. And I hate it when people feel flustered and there's like friction in games. That's unnecessary. So, and I like to, make it easy for people and accessible.
And the D8 and the D10 are so close to each other. Like it takes a bit of time to figure out between the two how they look, right?
And then hardly use D12. That is a great point. Whenever I've taught someone and they're always like trying to figure out, they like you said, they get flustered. So having those beginner dice, I might have to keep a pair of those on hand.
I'm curious because since we brought up D12s, is there any system that uses D12s like a lot or is based around the D12? Because that is my personal favorite dice, and I never get to use it outside of playing a Barbarian in 5th edition.
Wow, I wonder, is there a D12 game system? Teffer and Frey. I've never heard of this game.
I feel like with the clock face or something, it would be kind of a cool thing to do. Or there's 12 hours in a half day. I don't know. I feel like there's something you can make out of it that would be interesting. So,
yeah, I'm like looking online right now, and I don't know. Well, so there's some games that like your die is determined by your class, and so like some people will only roll a D12, some people will only roll a D8. Some people only roll, and I believe that's like mazes, but I think mazes only goes to D10. Yeah, I've never played any game that just uses a D12 as like the base die.
I'm curious, how many games have you played that aren't fifth edition, or if you needed to, you could run at a time?
So I looked at my list. It's 712.
This
No,
is
I'm just
why
kidding.
we
I'm
got
just
you
kidding. I'm
on.
just
Oh,
kidding.
yeah. I was like, that is every game ever made, probably.
I couldn't. Yeah, that broke my brain. Thank you.
No, it's funny. I actually haven't like sat down and thought about all the games I've played, all the games I feel I could run, and made that list. And maybe I should. I've just never thought to do it. And I should probably go and update my profile and start playing, and then I would have a list that I could easily look at. I don't know how many games. I mean, at least 20. At least 20. That might be too conservative of a number, But it's also like when you learn one, like when you play Monster of the Week, you've kind of learned a bunch of other Powered by the Apocalypse games that like you could then pick up and run, and you just kind of like read like what's the addendums, what are the changes. Like Court of Blades is Blades in the Dark because it uses the Forge in the Dark system, but there's like some flavor changes and some like additional stuff. So sometimes like already knowing the base system makes it really easy to like play other versions of that. Like if you've played Year Zero engine and you then play Alien, you kind of know how to play Alien.
Well, this leads me to another question. Like, what if I wanted to be, say, a GM that had a fairly solid base around like a lot of different systems? What would be the first 5 systems that I'd want to spend my time learning that would kind of leverage the ability to play other systems, do you think?
Okay, great question. And we're going to ignore 5th edition because we're just going to
Yes.
assume that like that, so many people know. So I would say the D100 system. That like what like Chaosium uses, Call of Cthulhu, Harlem Unbound, a lot of those. That's a great one. Then I would learn Powered by the Apocalypse, which is like Monster of the Week, a lot of PBTA games, which is a 2d6 system. Forged in the Dark, that would be the third one. That's a d6 dice pool system. So you roll multiple d6s based on like how good you are at something, and then you take the highest from that pool, from that roll. Then I would the Modifius 2d20 system. You were talking about Star Trek Adventures. Modifius
Right.
has tons of. They have like Fallout, they have Dune, they have Conan, they have Star Trek. So they have a lot of like really strong IP games. And then the 5th one would maybe be the Year Zero engine, which is Forbidden Lands, Alien. I think maybe even Dragon's Bane is going to be the Year Zero engine. So is the Walking Dead game. They use the Year Zero engine. So those would probably be the ones I would look towards to start.
Nice.
Well, I should tip my hand a little bit here. I looked up an article earlier today on great systems for new players or beginner players, and they suggested one in particular, and I'm curious if you've heard of it and if you have any thoughts on it.
Mhm.
But it's called the Index Card RPG.
Yes, I do own it somewhere. I have never actually played it, but I've read about it. And I was like, this is really fun. That is definitely a nice welcome to tabletop kind of game. Part of me, though, feels like it's a good departure. If you've been playing games for a while and you kind of just want something that really feels very fresh, it feels like a nice escape from traditional systems.
Now, my concern is that it's just going to be like Cards Against Humanity. Is that the case?
No, I mean from all the people I've talked to who've played it, it really lends on the imagination, and so I think people that maybe aren't, if they're brand new, they might have trouble kind of like reactivating their imagination for the first time in a gameplay experience. They might feel hindered by having that onus put on them. So I don't know if that's what I'd recommend, but having not run it, I feel like I couldn't really say for sure. I mean, that's like an outside opinion. Someone's gonna be upset with me on the internet for saying that.
Yeah. No, I didn't want to dive too deep as soon as you said you haven't played it yet. No, that's fair. Thank you for indulging me. And then kind of a follow-up on the beginner note for kids. I end up teaching a lot of kids how to play D&D.
Yeah.
And they all love it. It's great because they're like, oh, this is what so-and-so knows how to play. I'm so excited to play so I can join my friends. But are there any other games that, I mean, I'm not sure if you've had experience, DMing for all age groups. So let me actually start with that question.
Yeah, I've definitely GM'd for a number of youths if you will. Um, and traditional D&D isn't what I would always recommend. I
Yeah.
wouldn't. I wouldn't. I'm okay to die on that hill. I wouldn't run it again for kids under 12. I did that a bunch, and it's really more like, here's 5 stats. What do you want to do? You know.
Right.
I think there's a book that I'm actually a contributor towards that just got kickstarted a few weeks ago called The Little Game
Ooh.
Masters, or it's called the Little Game Master by Randall Hampton of Bards and Bullies. And
Bards and bullies. I haven't heard of this
yeah,
at all.
it just it just got kickstarted like a few weeks ago, but I'm writing one of the adventures in it. But it's like a streamlined version of 5th edition. That's a lot easier to consume for kids. And then another game that I think is great for all ages is called Quest, and it is a great rules-like kind of tabletop RPG that uses a D20.
Quest.
Yeah,
Okay.
Quest is great. Quest has a lot of fun things about it. It uses like there's abstract distance, which I think is really good, especially if you're doing theater of the mind games, where like you're next to them, you're close to them, you're far away from them. That's the distances. So you're like, oh,
Right.
I want to move close. Cool. You move one closer, which is also similar to 13th Age, which uses that. But 13th Age is like a kind of advanced D&D game. But and then you kind of just choose what your abilities are, and you choose some special things about you. It's very easy to make a character. I think it's a really approachable. If you want to play D&D but you don't want to learn all of D&D, Quest is a great game to explore.
Cool.
Okay, so it's built off of the 5e engine and then kind of simplified?
No, I wouldn't even say it's built off the 5e engine. I think the thing that it has closest to 5e is the fact that there's a D20.
Okay.
But that would be
All right.
easy to play with kids, you're saying, basically?
Yeah, I think because it's just so rules light. You get a few special abilities that you can kind of interpret story wise, but it's definitely not as chonky as D&D.
I'm curious, do you have a personal favorite that you just love to play that we haven't mentioned yet?
Ooh.
Like you actually have a night off. You get to play any system you want with your best friends. What would you be choosing?
Are you allowed to pick one, or has this
No,
become favoritism?
I'm not. Here's the thing. I'll tell you. I think I just ran the best game of my life. I ran like a 7 episode game of Monster of the Week, and I don't think I've ever played a better tabletop role playing like session or series of sessions than that one. It was just like so much fun, and so that is one of my like currently, just because like it was also the game was set in San Francisco, so there was a lot of like fun history and folklore I got to draw upon. So up this week it's Monster of the Week.
That's an interesting point, actually. I feel often like people who play D&D who want something different bring up Monster of the Week. That is probably the first game to come up when people are looking for something different. And let's just take a second to dive in on that, if you don't mind, about what it is that you like about Monster of the Week that is so refreshing for people moving from D&D.
So I think one of the reasons why it got very popular is because of the McElroys, the Adventure Zone.
Yes.
After they moved away from D&D, they did Monster of the Week. That led to like a all-time like huge injection of players interested in Monster of the Week. So if we see Dimension 20, if we see Critical Role, if we see the Adventure Zone continue to play other game systems, they are going to like do leaps and bounds for the tabletop industry. They do make a huge impact. But I think one of the reasons why I felt it was great for my players is they did not have to think about too much about the world lore. They understood what is reasonable in the reality that is presented to them. If we are playing in modern day San Francisco, you don't have to think too much about, well, how do I get around? How would I do something? In a fantasy world, you have to consume a lot of lore to kind of get very immersed.
Right.
So it's like, well, I'd like to go to this island. Like, no one could go to that island. It's full of snakes. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, But if I'm like, if I was like, oh, like, let's go to Alcatraz. Cool, we'll take the ferry over there. Because there's a ferry that goes to Alcatraz. So it gives the players a lot more control over like how they understand the world to operate.
That's an interesting point. Yeah. So, okay. It makes it there's less lore you have to consume in order to feel informed.
Yeah.
And the physics are consistent for the most part too. Like a lot of things in fantasy, we don't always know. It's like, well, can people come back from the dead or not? Right? Like
Yeah.
it's like, can I heal or do I have to like go to a hospital? Like, how does this work? Right? So
What is the
there's
astral plane?
yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of other games that require so much to consume so much, and that's why modern games, they're not as popular, but you at least know, like, well, it's probably easy to do this, right? Because I could do this in the real world.
Mhm.
And sometimes we have people play D&D games like, well, I could do this in the real world. Why can't I do this in the D&D game? Right? So sometimes it's reverse, but
Yeah.
I think it gives the players a little bit more mental space to focus on the game and the story rather than the world when they play something like Monster of the Week.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So the lore side's easier, and mechanically, is there anything about it that you tend to like Monster of the Week for people transitioning to it?
You already said it best. The character creation stage where everyone has relationships to each other is fantastic. As a GM, it makes for easy, great storytelling because you kind of know like how everyone's connected. You can figure out ways to bring it up, to way to pull on those strings of how those people are connected. It's great. I love how character creation works. Same with Blades of the Dark. I love how that works as well. So I think any game that has like how do these characters and this is something that I probably shouldn't say this, but this is something I've heard rumored that they're working on for the revised 5th edition. Is how parties already know each other, and they're kind of putting a big focus on that because they've seen the success of these other game systems.
Yeah, I've heard something similar. I mean, I don't know if it was just because influencers have been talking about it and making their own versions as well, but it makes sense that Wizards someday would start to borrow from the influencers that have expanded
Yeah.
so much.
Mhm. I agree 100%. Wizards will borrow stuff from people.
Quote unquote.
But I'm curious, what about, do you have any like hidden gems that you just like, they're not super popular, but they're great?
Ooh, hidden gems. You can see like I'm like looking over at my like
Your library.
So like this is like the studio library. My home has the actual library. Pirate Borg is a lot of fun.
What is it?
Pirate Borg.
Oh.
So there's Morkborg, which
Mhm.
is like a Swedish death metal take on dark fantasy, which is it's another one of those fight to lose games. But then there's Pirate Borg, which is really fun, and there's Cyborg, which is really fun. I just played Into the Odd a few months ago. That was really fun. Into the Odd's kind of like a treasure hunting game. Like you're going out to find treasure because that's what is exciting, to find relics. And it's loose enough that you can kind of like drop mechanics into it to like make it more fun. Gosh, I really want to play 13th Age. I haven't played it. I have the book. I just feel like it's so much work to get it. It seems like a little more in depth, so I can't just get a quick game going with some players. What is something else that I have really enjoyed? Masks. Great superhero game.
That actually is towards the top of my list of new systems to try, new games.
7th Sea is really fun. It's like a great pirate kind of game. I think Alice is Missing is incredibly unique. Kids on Brooms, I mean, that definitely got a lot of attention when Dimension 20 ran it, which is kind of like a youth at a magic school learning to be wizards and such, and that's a really, really fun game. In Brindlewood Bay, I already kind of talked about that. That's also, like I backed a new Kickstarter they have, and I can't wait for my game to show up.
Kickstarter, it's the kryptonite, isn't it?
It
So
really
many.
is.
Oh my gosh, I try to limit myself to one a month.
Here's something I haven't played, and I can't wait to get a chance. But I haven't played a Star Wars tabletop RPG, and I would
I've
love
heard
to play
great
a Star
things
Wars
about them. I've
Yeah.
heard they're really fun, actually.
Yeah.
It was one of the ones that I had been recommended to me many times before the sort of, like before even I had really got heavy into 5th edition. People were like, you should try the Star Wars one. Back when I was playing Pathfinder 1E.
right?
Yeah.
Ooh, or One Ring. I'd like to try out One Ring. But I want to try Star Wars first. I play a lot of fantasy, so I like trying out these other systems. So that's definitely on my list.
And One Ring is Lord of the Rings lore, is it not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's. I don't know if it's officially licensed. So I think it's like maybe
Because there's also the Five Rings, I think it is, which is a take on. It's set in the samurai medieval.
Yeah, Legend of the Five Rings, not Lord of the Rings related, but that's definitely kind of like a has like a pretty intense honor system, which is really fun. And that there's like I think they're on 5th edition right now. I think 4th edition came out like 10 years ago. But yeah, so that's like one of the new ones. Excited to play. Was it? I've played around with a few OSR games, which are fun, like old school rules, which are fun. They're kind of, they're very dungeon crawl, like, you bring a couple characters to the game, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they're just brutal and punishing.
They're incredibly brutal, yeah. Scum and Villainy, if you want to play like a Firefly type of game, if you like Firefly.
Heard of that one.
So those are those are like some on my list.
That's a lot of hidden gems. I love it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I was curious, have you ever played Numenera?
I have once at a convention. I was actually at Game Hole and I played that. I really enjoyed how they did that setting where it's sci-fi and fantasy at the same time. I thought that was fun.
I don't really know much about it except that the art is really cool in a lot of their books, and I thought it looks really neat. So I've been curious about ordering the book or just sort of going into it. But I haven't heard anyone who played it, so I'm glad to hear that you have. Do you know what kind of system it is?
That is that I think it's a cipher system.
What's that?
Yeah.
Gosh, cipher system is there's a bunch of games that use it too, I believe. What is the cipher system? What is it? Let's go and find out. Let's
you have to
together.
battle rap to win.
See.
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
It's like a cipher. No.
500 page book. All right, it's resolving tasks. Okay, so it looks like it's a scale of 1 to 10. 10 is Herculean and 1 is extremely simple. And it uses pools. So it's kind of like dice pools.
Yeah, one of the great things about it, the cipher system, is that it just can go across multiple genres. It's the same thing for many genres.
Yeah, like Fate. Like Fate is a great system that does many genres too. There's this GM that on Start Playing who I always see him DM Eric. He's always talking about how much he loves Cipher System because it's really flexible. Is what I've heard from him.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I have a buddy who constantly takes the same group of people that he's played with for years around into different game systems, kind of like what you were talking about earlier. And he mentioned the cipher system actually being really useful for that purpose. So I'd imagine that anyone listening who knows that they want to take their players through a bunch of different genres to keep things fresh and interesting, the cipher system is definitely something to consider. And like you said, Fate. Yeah, Fate would, I don't know Fate very well, but that's great to know that that's another option to consider.
Ooh, and Vampire the Masquerade. I haven't played that yet.
Right. I hear that.
That feels like one I should have played. That and Traveler.
I never played Traveler either, but I have a bunch of friends who have done Vampire, actually, and they all seem to love it. But I feel like you have to be like, I think there's vampire people, like they're into vampires. Like they're into that genre, and that's like that's their thing. I'm not a huge vampire guy. I'm more of a pirate guy.
I think that's maybe why I haven't. Like my vampire phase was in high school watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yeah, exactly.
I never got too much into like the Blade style vampire media. Which but I would love to play, like a San Francisco by Night. That's more of a what we do in the shadows and less of
less of a hardcore Blade rendition. Although the opening scene of Blade is still one of my favorite opening scenes ever in a movie. It's
the first Blade in the club.
In the club. It's like one of the greatest opening scenes in a movie I think ever. It's
with the blood showers.
Yeah, the slow recognition of this guy being in this horrific situation. He's crawling out, and then all of a sudden, Blade's there, and it just like turns crazy. It's I don't think I really enjoyed any other Blade movie after the first one, but that got me. I also, funny enough, that was the only movie I've ever snuck into when I was underage because it was an 18A movie, and I snuck in when I was like, I want to say 15 or something.
Yeah, so, Chris.
I actually only saw that scene and like a couple others, and then they kicked us out, and we had to go back to Something About Mary, which was funny.
Nice.
But yeah, is there? Do you know any others that for our vampire fans out there, other than Vampire the Masquerade, or is there anything that's sort of like undead focused that way that would be kind of cool?
Okay, so if you're looking for like vampires and that kind of like dark vibe, World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness. Onyx Path Publishing. They have everything. They have Mage the Ascension, which is like set in the same kind of universe. I believe set in the same universe as Vampire the Masquerade. If you want to play Mage, if you want to play a werewolf, if you want to play a hunter who hunts down vampires, they have it's a breadth of games, and they all take place in the same world. I think Chronicles of Darkness is the medieval and the long ago, and I think World is modern. And so I haven't got a chance to play much of the Onyx Path games, but I hear GMs just constantly telling me how much fun they're having. But I think they all kind of lead towards really lineage stories, long stories that have really big impacts, and they build upon each other, and they're really strong storytelling games.
I'm curious about what about most anime? If I'm into anime and I want to do some crazy anime stuff, what would be a great game for that?
Ooh, that's okay. That one's hard. There's I think Big Eyes is the name of it. What's it? Big Eyes Small Mouth is a game I see often touted about being good for anime. BASM. I've never played it, so I couldn't tell. But it is usually touted as a great game for anime. In the next few weeks, though, I'm going to be playing the Avatar, The Last Airbender anime.
Oh, yeah, that was Kickstarted.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that looks really, really fun.
Have you ever done Glitter Hearts? I heard that one is kind of...
I have played Glitter Hearts. Glitter Hearts is a lot of fun.
Okay.
And then you also have, what's the other one? Monster Hearts, which is, a game about, a bunch of hormonal monster teenagers, which is fun too. I mean, there's really almost a game for anything.
There really is.
This actually, that makes me think of another category of what about one that I could play with my girlfriend or wife or something in that genre that would be more, I don't know, romantic-y or relationship-y, that kind of way. Anything in that genre?
Let's see. There was a really so I would say a great one is there's a 2-player game coming out by the Critical Roles publishing house, which is a dueling game. And that has a lot of you're dueling against each other, and it's telling a story at the same time. That's great. Starcross is also really cool. It's a romance game. And then there's also Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is all about relationships between each other. Which is also a kind of a great game as well, along with Monster Hearts. And technically, Burning Wheel could even be a good tabletop RPG for romance. But Starcross is probably one of the best.
I don't know how you do it, how you have all this time for figuring out how to play all these games, and it's almost like it's part of your job. So where would someone go if they really wanted to learn how to play this game because they just can't get their friends together? They're just having a hard time finding the people that are interested. Where can they go if they just want to get a taste for something like this? Do you know a spot?
There's a lot of places you can go, but the best place, the place that's easiest to find a game, you could be playing in a game tonight, is Startplaying.games. It's the number one platform for finding games, groups, and game masters. I think we got there's probably at least over 300 games or game systems that are available right now. But there's even more if you look just by GM and you look for that one game system. You can see all the different GMs that run the game system you're interested in. And you can sort by time and day, so you can decide what games you want to play based off your availability. And you can also read reviews about the different GMs to make sure your play style is compatible.
That's awesome.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like such a great tool. I mean, what was that website again?
Startplaying.games. Y'all, thank you so much for letting me shill. I appreciate it.
Hey, that's the preneur sort of the nerdpreneur. But honestly, you're the first person we've invited back on to the podcast, and a big part of that is you were an amazing, awesome guest. So if you haven't checked out Devon's original episode, it's maybe I don't know, whenever this comes out, it's a few episodes
a couple
back.
back.
We'll link it in the show notes for you as well, so you can find it.
You know what's funny? We talked about so many games tonight, and I'm still thinking of we didn't talk about this one. There's so many games. There's a game for everything.
Do you want to give a shout out of any that you just feel like they're just stuck in your head and you just need to let them out?
No, because then I feel like I'm going to be giving. I'm focusing on these last ones that
You can't pick your favorite child, Devon. I
right. I
understand.
know. Everyone should play Alice is Missing. That's amazing.
Why is that? That one sounds like it might be really interesting, but why is that one so interesting? You
It's
actually
a
brought that up during
silent
the horror one
It's a
too.
silent tabletop RPG. So
What?
you all like have to like text each other or like you're all like through the same messaging service. You're uncovering like what happened to Alice, and you are playing as a character. There's this thing called Jebensha. I think that's how you say it. It's in China, and it's essentially like murder mysteries. And they are like the biggest thing in China. Like I think 1 in 3 Gen Z are playing these games, and you're essentially like uncovering and trying to figure out like who was the murderer. And so it's kind of like this. We're playing a murder mystery at a table rather than like around, and you're asking people questions. So and instead, like you don't talk to each other. And when you text, it's a lot easier to assume a character and to assume this other thing because you're wearing a mask, i.e., that you're doing this digitally. So it's really powerful and emotional game. So a lot of people and it's not related to fantasy. You don't have to be caught up in a fictitious setting. It's grounded in the real world. So it does deal with some pretty adult themes. So like kind of know that going in. But it's so unique, and I'm seeing more and more games that are like this from the get go.
Very, very cool. That's awesome.
I'm so glad that you came on our show again. And I mean, like we've already said the praises, but just the amount is so useful for myself. I'll speak for myself and for anyone who's listening who's just like, God, I am so over Dungeons and Dragons. So thank you for leading our discussion and answering like a barrage of questions from us, man. Like you were on it. This was like quiz number A for your thesis.
I had one more I wanted to ask about though. What about if I wanted to play a Futurama style game that was like sci-fi but like funny?
Okay, well you could play Paranoia. Because it is just like you'd have to. I mean, you change some of the rules of Paranoia, but that feels the closest to Futurama off the top of my head. I don't know any other adventures that are like ideal for that. I think that might be the closest. And you could also do something like Scum and Villainy, because Scum and Villainy is I think it's a Forge in the Dark game. It's all about heists, but you can make it about deliveries instead. And you could just like flavor it with that kind of absurdity in humor.
Any other sci-fi ones that you would recommend that would be that are just great?
I talked about Mothership, Alien, Death in Space. Those are great. Cyberpunk has a lot of love, so that's also really fantastic. Traveler is, I often hear touted. It's one that's still on my list to play, but it is, that and Stars Without Numbers are like fantastic for that kind of world building. So I definitely recommend checking those out, depending on like how much sci-fi you want. If you want science fantasy, something like Starfinder's great. But if you want science fiction, I'd probably maybe check out those.
That's awesome.
This has just been great. Thanks, Devon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course, y'all. It was a pleasure.
And to all of our listeners, as always, keep it nerdy.
Hey, Nerdpreneurs, remember to check the show notes for the ultimate list of tabletop RPGs, a full list of all the game systems we talked about today. Thanks again for listening, and keep it